Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast. Today's episode is special and unique because we actually have Amy McCready, the founder of Positive Parenting Solutions, parenting contributor on the Today Show, best-selling author, and creator of the 7-step parenting success system. You guys, this is like a celebrity expert being on the show. Her proven system for parenting has helped over 100,000 parents of toddlers to teens bring peace into their homes. And really, she gives you step-by-step processes, not just philosophies. And a few things that we cover in the episode are, number one, what to do if you disagree on your parenting philosophy, between you and your partner. What to do if you're triggered by your kids so that you can prevent that even turning into an argument with your partner. And she gives a really powerful, simple, but I'm telling you, I think it's profound, tool of what you can do in the moment if you start to get triggered by your kids. And then also how to make sure your partnership and your parenting thrives, because a lot of times it can become all about the kids and you lose sight of your relationship. Before we introduce you to her though, we also must say you've got to attend a webinar that she is doing just for our community. I mean, this is a big deal because she doesn't do this often. She is very busy with what she does. And on November 10th, it is a special training just for all of you, the couples in our community. And so you actually want to go to onlinecouplesworkshops.com/parenting. And that /parenting is really important because that's the page specifically for hers. And in this webinar that she's doing for free for all of you, she's going to cover the 5 steps for no yelling consequences that all parents can agree on. She's also going to share how to find common parenting ground, even if it feels like a battlefield in your relationship now. And 3 action steps you can take today to unite in parenting. So really, as you're listening, grab your phone, go to your web browser, type in onlinecouplesworkshops.com/parenting and sign up for this on November 10th. And with that, let's introduce you to Amy McCready. Amy, thank you so much for being on to add value today. We're so excited for this.
Oh, Jocelyn and Aaron, thank you for inviting me. It's always such a privilege to work with both of you.
And this podcast is obviously super valuable for the listeners. And I think there's more than ever such a selfish desire here for us, given we are parents. They just,
She
hasn't come Earthside yet.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
We're so excited to learn from you. Honestly, thank you so much just for being on here. And like I said, I think this is even just for us.
We'll just have a little personal counseling session.
Exactly. Yes. Well, we're going to cover a lot of different spaces, but the first thing we wanted to cover, because we hear this a lot with the couples we interact with, do you find that most couples go into parenting with like a solid plan? They feel united. They've been researching and learning about parenting. Or do you find that most couples just try to wing it and then hope they'll figure it out in a united way?
Well, I think most couples probably go into it thinking they're united because they've had some initial discussions. Do you want to have kids? Yeah, I want to have kids. Great. This is going to be fabulous. And so we tend to think we're going to be united because we haven't had those deep conversations about, how do we see our parenting philosophy work out? How are we going to handle the behavior issues that happen in the moment? And honestly, that's a hard thing to do because so much of that you don't even know until you're in the thick of it. So it would be wonderful if couples really did that work ahead of time and with some guidance really got into a lot of those issues. But in my experience, most don't. And then we get into this pickle of, okay, now we're in the heat of the moment and we find we're not aligned. And then how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, really key. And I think one quick follow-up to that is, do you think it's important that couples really evaluate if they're just banking on how they were raised versus really discussing, okay, we might have both had different styles of parenting from our parents, but let's evaluate, is this what we want to replicate or do we want to do it differently?
Absolutely. I think the biggest influence in our parenting is how we were raised. Some people, just want to emulate that, and others want to do the complete opposite. So, but for better or worse, how you were raised really impacts your parenting. But I highly recommend that, we have those discussions, and they can be really informative discussions that bring you closer as a couple. And you can talk about very specifically, what are the things that you remember in your childhood that you felt good about? What are the things that your parents did that you want to try to emulate in your parenting? Maybe they were really great about family rituals, or they helped you learn from your mistakes. Maybe they had a focus on fostering capability and independence early on. And so those are things that I want to make sure that we include in our parenting philosophy. And then, of course, the flip side of that is, what do you wish your parents would have done differently? We know our parents loved us dearly. They did the best they could and they knew how to, but I'm sure there are things that we wish they had done differently. So don't be afraid to name those, put them down on paper, and talk about how that might play into your parenting. And then we say, okay, as a family, what values are important to us? What do we hope in terms of communication down the road? I always encourage parents to play this game with themselves where they're imagining that their kids, their current little kids or their future kids, are young adults and they're out having dinner with their friends and they're chatting about their childhood. And of course, you're out of sight, but you can hear this whole conversation. And you hear your child say, when I was growing up, my mom always what? My dad always what? In my family, we always blank. So, how would you want them to finish that sentence? Right? That's the way we're designing our parenting. So, we take into account all of those memories and experiences we had, and then what vision do we want for our family moving forward? And that's a great place to start in trying to figure out, what do we want our parenting philosophy to be.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's such a great way to transition into that. And oh man, I love that so much. I guess the question that comes up for me next are, what are some of these parenting philosophies, right? So, even in discussing together about how I was raised, and Jocelyn and I talking about things that we would want to bring in and not, I mean, I think is huge. But then I might be left with, well, okay, we got it clear on that, but what type of philosophy can we now take on together as we move forward? And are there specific ones? Are there ones we should avoid? Because, being where we are now, it might seem like, oh, do we just go with it at this point? So, really, what are some philosophies that parents can now step into together after having this type of conversation?
Absolutely. And I love your intentional approach, which is the way that the families in your community are, which is so amazing. But if you talk to experts, they will say that there are four general styles of parenting. Not that we have to put everything into buckets, but this just helps us get a perspective. So the first one is neglectful. And of course, that's not going to apply to anybody in your community. So we're not going to spend a minute on that. But then the next three parenting styles follow along a continuum. So if you can imagine, on one end of the continuum would be the permissive style of parenting. And so with that style, we would have high levels of freedom, but fairly low levels of responsibility. Few, if any, rules, very little guidance. And if you have known any kids who grew up in a permissive home, that creates a lot of challenges for that child growing up. On the other end of the spectrum is the authoritarian type of parenting. Now, there you would have very high expectations, but low levels of warmth. So, some of the discipline strategies in that style might include spanking, yelling, shaming. Here at Positive Parenting Solutions, we call that style the overpower paradigm because it's about the parent overpowering the child. The big problem with that authoritarian style of parenting is that it creates an external locus of control, meaning the child learns to behave or make choices by being forced to obey or out of a fear of punishment, rather than making decisions from their own internal locus of control. And then, as you might expect, there's a middle in that continuum, and that's the authoritative parenting. And that would be both, we would have high expectations, but there would also be high warmth. There's freedom within limits. Children are treated with respect. Positive parenting, which is what we teach, falls into that category. So the focus of positive parenting would be a strong emotional connection, first and foremost, providing warmth and structure, with the emphasis on fostering a sense of belonging and significance for the child. We focus on training rather than punishment. That we focus on problem solving and skill development and empowerment. And in spending our time and energy in those areas, what happens is that we create that internal locus of control. So the child makes good choices, does the right thing because it's the right thing, not because they're afraid of a punishment or they're being forced to obey. And obviously, the relationship, the long term relationship, is so much stronger with that type of parenting rather than just that, very authoritarian, you'll do it my way or the highway. That doesn't lend itself to great parent child relationships in the long run.
That's
Hmm.
why I resonate so much with what you teach, positive parenting solutions, because it is about the relationship, which is what we're all about. We're about really having them feel safe, they can open up to you, but also they are becoming the best version of themselves, ideally. And I know some people listening are thinking to themselves, yes, I'm so on board. I want to step more into positive parenting solutions and making sure that we're balancing both structure and that warmth and love. But my partner, and this is where people's mind goes, but my partner grew up in that authoritarian and thinks that's how it should be done too. What are some steps? And I know we're going to go deeper into this on the webinar about how couples can talk more about this in a constructive way. But can you start to give some initial suggestions about what couples can do if they really feel like they have such different perspectives on the philosophy?
Yeah, and I think, tell me if you guys would agree with this, but we have always felt that disagreements in parenting are very often a symptom rather than the real problem.
Hmm.
When we have very strong disagreements, like we can come from different perspectives and still agree on a parenting style. But when those disagreements are very strong, it's typically a symptom of a deeper relationship issue, where one person or both partners' needs are not being met. And then, so what tends to happen is we dig in our heels and we have to be right. And it's about winning, and rather than working together to find a philosophy that we align on. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about this in the webinar and also give really specific tools that parents can align around. But I always like for them to start just by finding any common ground, right? So identify those aspects of parenting and discipline in which you do agree. I promise there are some. And actually name the attitudes or the strategies that your partner demonstrates that you really appreciate. Are they super encouraging? Are they playful with the kids? Do they use a respectful tone? Are they consistent? What do you love about your partner and their parenting? And so we can at least start there with something that we agree on. And again, your partner may have come from that very authoritarian style growing up, and yours can be completely different. But if we can find some places that we already align, then we can build on that. And then the other piece of it is really, trying to understand why those differences exist. What is it about your childhood? What fears are you feeling that are influencing your parenting style? The more that we can sort of seek to understand where that's coming from, we can build on it. But then I like for parents to just kind of start small in one little area. Maybe it's around technology or bedtimes or family jobs, whatever it is. Find that one tiny little area, agree how you're going to handle it, and then stick to it.
Hmm.
And then we have some success there, and then we can build on that. And in fact, when we're doing the webinar, one of the tools that I'm going to teach is, it's so good. I love it. But it's a 5-step process for no yelling consequences. And the reason I picked that tool is, number one, it's super effective, but it's also a great tool that I found that parents with totally different philosophies on parenting, they can all agree on this one tool.
Hmm.
So for your listeners, I hope they'll come and learn that. But the key is, I think, starting small with something that we can work on together. We can align on this one little thing, and then we can build on that.
Hmm. That's so beautiful because there are so many other places just in personal habits, right? Like the progress and the focus on progress, as well as implementing tiny habits and just focusing more on like where you're doing a good job and where you are aligned rather than, one of the things we talk about often with couples is you just really focus on the aspects that you don't want. How
Yes.
often is your partner fulfilling on the expectations or roles that you have, like 10 of them, and then they do one wrong, and then what's the one that you focus on? The one that they didn't. So it makes so much sense to me to bring that into parenting as well. So, I mean, this just adds so many other philosophies that just work as a human being outside of parenting. I just love how you bring that into it's really just like a relationship with another human being. You happen to have birthed them, but they are a human being as well and have different developmental stages. When I think about this, and it's kind of maybe something you'll go much deeper in, I'm sure you will in the web class, but when I think of the parenting philosophy, it's kind of like the overall context or intention that a couple would have. Then the big word, right, that all parents talk about and don't always align on is that scary word of discipline. So where how I see it is discipline being how you act or how you execute on your philosophy, right? How does that actually get implemented? And so that's a place I think for myself as well as many couples who are parents we've talked to is that the practicality, the day to day, the execution of that philosophy starts to get them into some tensions and feeling like there's places that we're not aligned. So, in the execution, what is one of the biggest mistakes or misconceptions that you see parents have around the actual disciplining of their child?
Yes. So, you said so much there, Aaron, that I could just go on for days about. But I do want you said that big word discipline. But I just want to remind our listeners that the word discipline comes from the Latin root discipulus or disciple, which means to train or to teach, right? So we always like discipline doesn't have to be a big, scary, difficult, hard thing. It's all about teaching our kids what they need to learn to be successful, how to make good choices. If we always come back to training and teaching, then we can more easily align on what the strategy moving forward should be. But your question was like, what is one of the biggest mistakes parents make? And from what I see in the all the parents that we serve all over the world, it is this pendulum parenting. And so because family life is busy and chaotic, we're not always consistent with routines and ground rules. And so we're actually parenting on more of the permissive side of the continuum because, parenting is just really hard and it's hard to stay consistent. So we're over there on the permissive side, but then when things start to spin out of control, and they will, we clamp down hard. We get very authoritarian. We get tough. We get overly strict. We start handing out arbitrary punishments. And then we're totally surprised when kids push back. So that pendulum parenting back and forth, it does a couple of things. First, it doesn't give kids that sense of security in what's expected, but it also trains them that we're not really serious. They really don't have to follow the rules until we get really strict and lay down the law because,
Mhm.
now they know that we're serious.
Hmm.
So that issue of pendulum parenting happens for a number of reasons. First, kind of what you laid out there is that we have not established a plan ahead of time. What is it that we want for these people? What do we want our responses to be to their positive behavior and their negative behavior? When we have a plan ahead of time, then we're just not reacting from the gut in the moment. And obviously, it also comes from not having a set of strategies to follow, right? Not having a toolbox of
Mm,
proven discipline tools to use.
yeah.
So I think what happens is like in the moment when something goes down, the parent gets triggered. And then they're like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then it becomes, this fight between the two parents. But if we can just remember that, 99% of stuff does not have to be solved in that moment. We can
Wow.
take that time to calm down. And then as parents, okay, we can say, this is about training, right? What are all the possible solutions we can possibly implement to solve this problem. There's never just one way to handle it. So just totally brainstorm everything that you can possibly think of to solve this problem. And it doesn't have to be punitive and it doesn't have to be mean or hard or any of that. It might just be a skill deficit that we need to work on with a child. Or maybe we need to change up the routine, or we need to bring the child into the decision-making process to give him more empowerment over the way things are done. There are so many ways that we can solve the problem. But if we start with that question, well, it's a couple things. First, what is going to be most helpful for this child to make a better choice in the future or to be more successful? And what is most aligned with the way we want to parent?
Hmm.
Then we can pick from those solutions on what makes the most sense. So it's sort of like what you've talked about. It's doing that work up front to figure out what we want to be. And then we can gauge the possible solutions against that litmus test. Does that make any sense?
Oh, it makes more than sense. Makes dollars, right? No, I don't know why I thought of that. I think we were in a business setting more recently, but so many things. We're gonna have to go really deep in the web class. I'm really glad we're doing that follow up. So for those of you that are listening, you have to attend this web class, and we'll tell you more about that here in a second. But a couple of things that were huge to me that you said, it's number one, focusing on what's best for the child here. And I think that's a lot different of a thought process and mentality than like, what do I
Want
need
them
to
to
make
do.
them to do?
Mhm.
Yeah, like in those
Yes.
moments, like, yes, you're going to get triggered, you're going to have emotion. And it's really like, what do I need to make this child do in a lot of sense so that maybe I'm saying this the same way, but that is going to have me downregulate my own emotion as a parent and get them into the state I think they should be. Asking yourselves what is best for them, I think, is a completely different place to come from. But the other thing you mentioned that I actually felt would almost be tough for some parents to really acknowledge is because of the speed at which they typically are operating, because of the amount of activities, all the things that are happening, maybe the change of states that happen often. The fact that you said 99% of the things do not need to get a solution right now, that to me was huge. And if I was listening to that as a parent, like, whoa, you mean I can actually slow down, pause here, and we don't have to quote unquote do or come up with a solution? I think that's huge.
It is. It completely changes obviously the way you handle day-to-day situations, but it also changes your mindset about your job description. So we are playing the long game of parenting here, right? Our job is to take these people who are completely dependent on us and make them completely independent. And when we think about that long game of parenting, the way we handle specific situations may change. And that reacting in the moment. So think about the parent is feeling triggered. Do you think the kid's feeling triggered too?
Hmm.
Absolutely, right? And so when both parties are triggered, then it becomes a control power thing. And I feel the need to win as the parent. I need to be the boss. I need to show who's in control. And it's all about control parenting. And the kid has a choice in that moment. He can submit, and okay, a lot of parents like that idea. I want you to submit to my will, or he can totally fight back because human beings are born with free will. So most parents will probably describe their kids as being somewhat strong-willed, and most strong-willed kids are going to fight back in that moment. And so you're never going to come up with a solution that is as good in the long term in helping that child develop the skills that he needs and the character traits and all of those things that we talked about early on that we want for this child when we launch him out into the world. And back to that 99% of stuff. So the rubber meets the road challenge, as you mentioned, was okay. I'm triggered. I feel the need to do something about this right now. So I need some help reminding me that I don't have to do something about it.
Hmm.
And so one of the steps in the process for parents beginning to align is to come up with a nonverbal signal that they use with each other.
Hmm.
And so it can be putting their hands, both hands over your heart. And when I do that, that signals to you, I love you. We love our kids. And let's take a moment, calm our bodies, calm our emotions, and then we can decide on a solution that makes the most sense for everybody rather than just operating from our gut reaction, which rarely is the best solution. But that nonverbal in the heat of the moment is a great way to just help each other out because, I mean, however old you are, you have all these years of responding in a certain way. And so we need to sort of take some other action to help us break that trigger in the heat of the moment.
I think that is something everyone needs to write down and underline and create ASAP as a couple. And I want to connect it to a couple of things and questions that I want to go deeper into, right? Because I think one of the powerful things about a hand motion or something that's a physical reminder as opposed to verbal is
Mm.
sometimes the partner has the intent of saying something in a helpful tone, but actually it comes out in a judgmental tone, right? It's like, hey, remember what we said. And the other person then feels attacked.
Use the tools.
Yeah, use the
Use Amy's tools.
and so that can trigger the person even more like, okay, not only am I not feeling a sense of power with my child, but now I feel criticized by my
Mhm.
partner.
Mhm.
So I think the fact that it's a physical, and Aaron and I are now going to create this for sure together because that's huge. So then I want to go deeper because what we hear so often with couples on sessions is it starts as a parenting challenge. Their child isn't going to sleep. They're not listening to dinner instructions, and now it's turning into a whole temper tantrum. So it starts off parent child, but then, however, the other partner starts to engage and interact,
Mm.
then becomes an argument between the two of them.
Mhm.
Can you maybe just elaborate a little bit further on, okay, should only one parent handle that in the moment and like the other partner just kind of like not
Oh
interrupt
man,
and
that's a
try
good
to
question.
like give feedback?
Hmm.
Yes. And again, there's so much to these questions that you're asking. We could just spend hours. So I hope everybody comes to the webinar so we can really get into specific strategies. But okay, let's talk about that situation in the moment, the bedtime battle, the mealtime challenge, whatever it is. So my job as a parenting instructor is to teach parents how to eliminate those situations from happening in the first place, right? There are such simple tools and simple steps that we can take that we don't even have to deal with that mealtime nonsense or the bedtime nonsense if parents have the right tools. So step one in every family is first deciding, okay, what is this problem that we're having that's triggering us at mealtime or whatever, and how do we solve for that? Now, there are always going to be things that come up outside of that. So the key is in that moment, I would say, if one parent is handling it, let's think about what handling it means. So are you trying to do discipline in the heat of the moment? If there is, again, this is going to be very situation specific, so it's kind of hard to give a general answer.
Hmm.
But the key thing in the moment is to just sort of calm everybody down. Again, we're usually trying to solve the problem in the moment, and that's not helpful. So it's getting to a point where we can just calm everybody down, and then we can figure out, okay, how are we going to handle this? But if one parent is handling it, I would absolutely say the other one should, not be throwing that parent under the bus, not giving the parent direction, because then the kids get mixed signals, right?
Hmm.
They don't know what's really expected of them. They also learn that they can manipulate one parent against the other. And then sometimes, too, we have a situation where kids start favoring one parent over the other. So we don't want to be playing that good cop, bad cop. We don't want to be having those sort of discussions in front of the kids. If your partner's handling it, let them handle it. Now, remember, you always have your nonverbal tool that we've decided on. So you put your hand over your heart, which is that reminder to your partner, hey, let's just calm the situation down. We can figure out a solution for this later.
Hmm.
That's always the best way to go. The exception to that would be if a situation is happening where the children are being harmed in some way, physical harm, emotional harm, like your partner is losing it. And that happens in families. In that case, you must step in swiftly. And again, you're not throwing your partner under the bus, but you just say, sweetie, I've got this. Why don't you go take a few minutes and I'll handle things with the kids? So that would be the exception where you would sort of step in and take over if there is some physical or emotional harm going on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh yeah,
Oh
so
yeah.
important. And I think it's about the debrief. Aaron and I are huge on whether it's a conflict about children, a conflict about money, a conflict about intimacy. What we find so often from couples, and they hear from us a lot on the podcast, is you need to debrief after the emotion has de-escalated. You're not in that state of being triggered. And so what I'm hearing in your share, correct me if I'm wrong, is if there is something they observe in their partner that they prefer to be different, debrief afterwards when
Mm,
things have calmed down. But that's different than I'm going to pull them into the room and start an argument with them and tell them why everything they do is wrong. And I think that approach to, I want to debrief with you as a united partner, as opposed to, I'm now going to criticize you when we're in private, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So those conversations should always happen in private. And again, if the person feels attacked, they're immediately going to get defensive, and it's going to be all about who's winning again. So it is having that conversation when we're calmed down, we're debriefing on what happened, and then we can go through that same process again. Like if we still need to solve the problem, what are all the possible solutions we might implement to solve it? Or if that happens again, what are some different ways that we can handle it?
hmm
But yeah, that should always be sort of offline, not in front of the kids. Otherwise, we do get into that situation where the kids are perceiving that good cop, bad cop type of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
hmm at this point, because I feel this a little bit myself, or we're not even quite there yet, meaning we have not brought our daughter Earthside, and that's a
She's still in the womb getting cooked.
that's a phrase I heard recently that I like. There's obviously a big change, or maybe a better word is addition to the responsibility that I now play as an Aaron Freeman, right? As a human being. And that is going to be this role of dad, and the way I see it, like being a guide, right?
Mhm.
So many of the couples that we talk to, and it seems like almost 85% of the couples that we coach are also parents, but at some point they feel like, I'm going to say, and correct me on any terminology, but they feel like the role of parenting has now like taken over their life and taken over like the relationship, in a sense where it now feels like the relationship between the partner is more so on the back burner. So how can couples think about this balance in roles? Are we supposed to see the parenting role as being the most important, and that the romantic relationship role isn't as important? Or is there a way to do both? Can I really nurture my partnership while being the very best guide and parent that I can be?
Yes, I think we have to do both. Otherwise, we're going to be unhappy people as partners, or we're going to have a lot of discontent in our parenting. So I think kind of what you described happens somewhat naturally once we have kids, right? Because once we have kids, our priorities change. These little people are all consuming. We as parents live in a constant state of exhaustion, just trying to keep them alive. And just kind of naturally, it means less time that we are spending with our spouse. And in most couples now, the partner's emotional needs take a lower priority than they
Mm-hmm.
did before,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the parenting is all consuming. There's less time and intention for doing those acts of love and service and intimacy that keep us connected that we did before we had kids. And so we transition from being romantic partners to taskmasters and schedule keepers. It's all about that,
Mhm.
right? And so you can see how resentment can begin to fester within the relationship. And so you guys are the experts in how to keep the marriage fresh and keep that as a priority. But your partner needs to know, needs to feel and experience that they are your number one. Of course, we love our kids, so much, but your partner is number one. And so trying, this is hard, but trying to maintain those weekly date nights And it doesn't mean we have to go out of the house and spend money and get a babysitter. It can be after the kids go to bed, but like we take a shower and put on some nice clothes and have like a date like we used to have. I always like to try to think about those actions that we took when we were dating. Again, the acts of love and service and intimacy, those things that we loved about each other, continuing to do those. But it takes such intention. I mean, honestly, because we're just exhausted. And I love the one thing that I heard Jocelyn say recently about not forgetting about your appearance. And I think she recalled that recalled discovering that it had been like 5 years since she bought new underwear, which
Right.
I could totally relate to. And I remember being on like an every 5 day hair washing schedule. And I'm sure that was not joyful for my husband. But like the bottom line is that if we are not meeting each other's needs for emotional connection and intimacy and all of those things, we're not going to be successful in our parenting because it's going to start to drive a wedge and resentment is going to fester. And if there was any disagreement to start with, it's just going to get bigger and we're going to end up digging in our heels. And then it all becomes about winning and losing. So I don't even know why I answered this question because you guys are better prepared to answer this particular question. But the role is going to shift, right? Again, we're moving from being romantic partners to parents, and we have to be taskmasters and schedule keepers to some extent. But the more that we can keep those foundations in our partnership fresh and alive and fun and joyful, we're going to be more successful in our parenting.
And that's why it's so exciting to be doing this webinar. And I know people have heard us mention it a few times. You cannot miss this because a lot of times you can learn about parenting, but it's only speaking to you as one person. This webinar is going to be different because it's about you two as a couple becoming united
Mm.
and your partnership and your parenting thriving, both. It's not one or the other, it's both of them. And so, just as a reminder for everyone, you're going to get to learn so much more from Amy. And I know some of you, while you were hearing her share, you wanted to ask her questions. And so, you're going to actually have an opportunity at the end of the webinar to ask her questions to go deeper into what you heard today on the podcast, but also what you're going to learn on the webinar. So, make sure you sign up for November 10th. That's when the webinar will be. And so you actually want to go to onlinecouplesworkshops.com/parenting. And that /parenting is really important because that's the page specifically for hers. That link will also be in the show notes, but you cannot miss it because there's no one better than Amy. This is her domain and she really takes such an empowering approach to this. And you don't want your parenting conflicts to like tear you apart as a couple. And it doesn't have to go that way, really. And so, Amy, seriously, so inspired by you. Anything you want to just say in closing? Like, let's say maybe some encouragement, because some parents maybe had a very frustrating morning with their children right before listening to this, and they said something out of the heat of the moment to their kid and they feel guilty. Maybe just end with a positive note of encouragement.
Okay, so when you open it up to me like that, now I feel like I have a million things I want to share. But first thing, I just want to piggyback on what you said about attending the free class, because again, I've been doing this for so long. And the biggest thing that I see when partners are not aligned is that they don't have a set of strategies that they feel good about aligning around. And that's what we're really going to get into in the webinar that we didn't have time to get into in this discussion. So, that formula for consequences and those other really great tools that both partners are going to feel good about. So definitely come to that. The second thing is that, modeling is so important for your kids. So for that parent who had just the really worst morning and just lost it, be the model and just go to your child and say, you know what, I totally blew it this morning. I was triggered, I was feeling frustrated, and I let that frustration out by yelling at you. And that is not okay. And I want you to know that I am really working on that. And I want to be the best mom or best dad that I can be because this is the most important job I will ever have. So let's not beat ourselves up when we have those moments, but let's take it as an opportunity to really model recovery with our kids, recovering from our mistakes. And then the last thing is kind of along the same lines is, oh my goodness, let's give ourselves grace. The fact that parents are in your community tells me that they are amazing, intentional, parents. They care about their relationship with each other. They care about their relationship with their kids. And we're going to have good days and bad days. But let's just focus on encouragement for each other, encouragement for our kids, moving forward positively. We're always learning. And let's just not spend so much mental energy on the difficult times, the things that we were not particularly proud of, because there's lots to learn. And again, we're going to do that in the web class.
It's all about learning, and I love that you mentioned just grace for yourself. And so, Amy, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks in advance for your time on November 10th. We are so grateful for you, and you are amazing.
Thank you, guys. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I can't wait till our session in November.
I know, it's coming up soon. All right, everybody, talk to you on the web class. We are all grateful for you. Talk soon.